Hi, I'm Kelly Rutherford, and I'm here with my dear friend Liz Dennery Sanders, and we're going to be talking about style and substance, how to create a compelling brand. So, Liz, we've known each other for a little while.
A long time.
Yes, a long time. We were on the board of Step Up together.
Yeah, I mean, it's like 13 or 14 years.
I know.
I'm dating us.
I know. 13 years is not so long ago.
No, that's true.
Goodness. And so why did you write this book? I want to know. And you're just amazing. You didn't even tell me you were writing this book. All of a sudden, I'm like going through Instagram. I'm like, she wrote a book.
A lot of people said that to me. I think I just had my head down writing it. I wrote Style and Substance for two reasons. The first reason is because I literally, over the last few years, have had hundreds of women come to me. And they're putting the cart before the horse when it comes to their marketing. They are focused on their logo and their website and their Facebook advertising.
That's all the fun stuff.
It is, right? But they're getting whiplashed by
Right,
bright, shiny, object syndrome. And they're comparing what they're doing to what everybody else is doing. And they haven't taken the time to do the brand foundation work, which is very much about figuring out, who am I? What am I delivering? What's my promise of value? Who is my audience? How can I connect to them in a deeper way? That's what creates a compelling brand. And you have to do that before you put the marketing strategy together.
Right.
So the first reason I wrote the book is to take a woman by the hand and walk her through the process of putting together a brand foundation and ultimately a brand handbook. And I wanted to create something that was super accessible, less than $20, that any woman entrepreneur could have easy access to. And if she does the work, then she is going to create something that's more engaging, more compelling, attract more clients, make more money, feel more confident. And the second
Be able to shop more, basically, is what you're saying.
Exactly. Buy the Dior shoes.
So, yeah.
Yes, if that's what she wants to
I
do,
know.
right? To be at choice, right? To
Yes.
have the freedom to do what she wants to do, to have flexibility, to live the life that she wants to live. And so that was really important to me. That was the first reason. The second reason, which I think is a much deeper reason, was I think we are at a place in time where we need more women to step up and say, I can do this. We need more women with a seat at the table in positions of power, both in business and politically. And so this is a book that helps a woman connect to her voice, to use her voice more effectively, and to connect with her audience and ultimately become more successful.
And why do you think we need more women in these positions?
Well, if you look
These
at,
roles.
think about it. We are 51% of the population, and yet we still live in a very patriarchal society. We're 51% of the population, and our government is made up of less than 20% women.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
And I think the situation that we find ourselves both in the US as well as globally is because there is an imbalance of power in many ways. And I think women's voices are important, and we need more women to be involved in the boardroom, in the White House, right? And I think that when women are empowered and when women are involved, society is better.
It's interesting because I think the word power sometimes scares people. I know when you say women's empowerment, it sounds like women are going to take over the world, which we are, but in our own way. And I think in the same way that anyone can take on their own world. In other words, they're creating their own world. The ability to say, I can be as expressed as I want to be.
Right.
So, and I think that sometimes power plays out differently in a masculine way than it does a feminine way. And when people get nervous when we talk about empowering women and this and that, I want to say, yeah, but it plays out differently. Our old idea of power is
very patriarchal,
control, force, aggressive. It's
Yes.
more male, which is
Correct.
very sexy in the right way. So, but I think when women talk about empowerment, it's really about nurturing and loving and building and a win-win and coming from an intuitive place. So it's something
We need
that
both.
Yes,
We need both.
Yes, we need both,
And
which is beautiful.
part of the problem is we don't always have both right now.
Yeah.
And hence, one of the reasons that I wrote this is because I want more women to feel confident. I want them to feel connected to their voice. I want them to be able to get their message out there, and to step into positions that they deserve to be in and not be afraid of that.
What's nice about this book is that it's a workbook.
It is.
Which I love. You know, it's not
Lots
just
of space to write.
Yeah, and it's a nice size book, and you can take it with you, and you can answer all your questions. It's like you can build your brand through the book instead of just reading a book.
Correct.
And walking away, okay, that's a
and
lot
maybe
of great,
absorbing 5%
right,
of it.
that's a lot of great information, but
Yes.
like, how do I apply it, and how does it apply to me personally?
Exactly.
So it's
This
really
is,
wonderful.
I think, valuable information and application, and that is part of the intention. There's a lot of space, there's a lot of prompts. These are the same questions and exercises that I've used with clients for years. And so the issue, of course, becomes, you can buy the book, but you have to use the book. It's not just something that you're going to read. You can go through it, you can read it, and I think that is valuable, but it will be 100 times more valuable to actually go through the process and to answer the questions and to do the exercises and to come out on the other side, right, with a brand handbook, with an anchor that guides you, a GPS in terms of how do I want to be perceived in the world, to be really intentional. Because once you have that, then you can do some of the sexy stuff, like advertise on Facebook, and the logo, create a beautiful website. But you really have to do this, I call it a brand archaeological dig, right? And I would say that 95% of the women that come to me have not done this work yet.
Well, how do we know what questions to ask, especially if it's new? If you're just new to...
If you're starting out.
If you're starting out, you may have this creative idea.
Exactly.
But then what are the steps to build a solid foundation? And, sometimes we don't know what questions to ask.
That's right.
Most women I know I've spoken to that have built brands really figure it out along the way. I mean, by making
As
mistakes,
you go along.
or through their friends, they call and say, "Oh my gosh, what do we do now? What's the next step? Or how did I get myself into this position?"
Well, women are really resorceful, right?
Yes,
so we rely on our
like,
friends.
Okay. Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
totally.
Exactly.
Well, and that's exactly right. And so we need the tools to do that, and the questions will lead us to where we want to go.
And I think that's part of the future of feminism too, is not blaming and not being victims, but saying, how can we help each other? Like, what are we doing to help each other and support each other? And moms do that. We know, being moms, like we have young kids. I mean, again, that's all new. But you walk out of that hospital with a baby, as many books as you've read,
it's just you're never quite prepared.
No. And so, I think women have a natural ability to connect and network and use each other's resources. So it's so wonderful now to see us all doing that in our businesses.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the reasons why I often will say that women are oftentimes better at creating a brand, because they do tend to be really resourceful. They're not afraid to ask for help from their female friends and from male friends as well. And, we're raised to be a little bit more in touch, I think, with our emotions. And branding is very emotional.
And multitasking.
We are multitasking. So for all of these reasons, women have a huge advantage when it comes to creating a more compelling brand.
Everyone being a brand, each individual in their own way is a brand.
Right. And it's funny because many people don't realize that. I have so many people ask me that question, or they'll say, well, I'm an individual, I'm a person, so I'm not a brand. And I'll say, well, you are a brand.
If I look at your Instagram account, you are branding yourself.
But whether you're intentional about it or not, right?
Right, exactly.
And so most people don't realize, a lot of, consultants or service professionals, they think, well, I'm a person, so how do I brand myself, or my brand versus my company? And it really does mesh together, particularly for a service professional. And so we have to remember that we actually do have a lot of control over how people perceive us. It was Jeff Bezos, who is the founder of Amazon. He said, your brand is what other people say about you when you're not in the room, right? So to even blow your mind a little bit more, it's the real estate in somebody else's head about you, right? So it's what people think about you, it's what people say about you, it's the thoughts, the words, the images, everything that comes to mind whether they're engaging with you in person, or whether they go to your website, or they see you at a speaking engagement or on television. There are always perceptions being formed. So an individual is a brand.
So what is the most important first step in building a brand?
So what I often have someone start with is an exercise, what I like to call your brand filter exercise. And so imagine that you are an invisible woman at a party, and there are a group of people, and you can sort of sneak up and listen, and they can't see you. Maybe it's a few acquaintances, people that you know, also some people that you don't know, and they're talking about you. And I say, what are the 3 or 4 words that you would want to hear them use about you? How would you want to be described? And so that starts to give you a lot of clarity around, how do I want to be perceived? How, what do I want people to think about? What words,
so good.
Right? And it's actually a really powerful exercise. It's one of the exercises in the book to start you on the path to creating an intentional perception about you, about your brand. So that's usually where I have people start.
Okay.
And then we move into talking about, what do I want to do in the world? How do I want to make a difference? Who is my audience? What is the value that I provide for them? So we start going down a list of questions that really help them to get more clarity.
That's so good. That is a really good list.
Have you read Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why, or ever seen his TED Talk? So I talk about Simon in the book. I'm a big fan of his, and his book is amazing, and I gift it to people all the time. And he talks about the power of your why. Much more important.
I have seen this.
Somebody
told me to watch this.
I think
recently.
his TED Talk is one of the most popular TED Talks of all time, right? And it's basically the premise of, which I completely agree with, people don't care about what you do, they care about why you do it. Meaning people want to believe, they want to know what you believe, and they want to believe what you believe, if it's your right audience, right? And so it's your why, your story, your narrative that is much more compelling than just what you're doing or how you're doing it. Obviously those things are going to be a part of the story, but it's your why that's at the heart of it. It's often very mission based.
That's beautiful. Now you're somebody that I've known to be someone that does a lot of research.
A
like
decent
a
amount.
private eye in your own life. It's just amazing. I'll always say, well, what did you do here? How did you get this information? Or what doctor are you seeing about this? And you said, well, I saw this, and this person, and I did the research, and I went and met with them. How important is that? I mean, it's something that I think we all want an answer quick, and we want to just go with it. But how important is it to sort of step back and say, I'm going to take a deep breath. For me, that's what I know, to take a deep breath and really ask some good questions and really want to feel good about stepping into certain decisions and choices that I make.
Yes. Well, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of asking questions, right? Because I do think that taking a step back and asking questions is what helps us to understand ourselves, what we want and what's important to us, in a much deeper way, right? It's really, really important. So, when it comes to creating a more compelling brand, it is all about asking those questions. And I find that the people that are more effective are the ones who do take the time, right? They slow down in order to speed up. And the other thing too that's really interesting is with the internet, women have so many more resources today. I mean, we are inundated with information. There's so much noise out there. So we do have to take a step back and sometimes take things with a grain of salt and not get overwhelmed. But on the flip side of that coin, there are so many low to no cost resources, in terms of, for a woman who is building a new business, right? Access is easier and more prevalent than ever before, right? So she has access to many more tools, online, through research, through this book, right? Now there's really no reason for her to not take a step back and ask the right questions first before she puts herself out there. Because there's nothing worse, as you know, I worked in public relations for a really long time. And, I still have people coming to ask me for media
I
advice and and questions in terms of working with the media. And one of the biggest mistakes that people make is not doing their homework beforehand, not doing their research, not really looking at their narrative, their story, because the media, they need information, quickly, usually. And it needs to be interesting for them, for their viewers, for their readers. It needs to make sense. And if you're not prepared to talk about that in an interesting, compelling way, it's just not going to work.
Well, we all know it's like when you're pitching a story for a screenplay or something. We all have this kind of idea of what we want to do, but then how do you pitch it, and how do you come up with the specifics to be able for someone else to be able to see the picture that's in your head? And I think it's the same, right? When it's a brand, it's how do you, what would you tell, like, obviously there are many different ages of we all start brands at different times in our lives, but definitely a young woman who's starting out, who's either going to college or not going to college, that has an idea. She's I have this idea. I mean, even my 8-year-old has an idea. I want to make dresses. Okay, So we find the place to make dresses. She learns how to make the pattern. She can make dresses. I mean, what would you tell someone starting out of any age, but young women? What are the steps? What are her first steps, just so that she would build a solid?
I do go back to Simon Sinek's work and to really ask herself, why am I doing this? Why is it important to me? And why is it going to be important to the people that buy my product or use my service? Because that really is at the heart of it all. And then to not be afraid to reach out and ask questions. Certainly do some research online, but I do think, to your point, that can end up being excessive, right? And overwhelming, because there's so much out there. But I do think that to take a step back, ask a lot of questions, do your research, and figure out, why am I doing this, right? How is it different than what other people are doing? Because differentiation is incredibly important when it comes to creating a brand that is going to be engaging and interesting versus blending in. That's right, because there's a lot of blending in going on, particularly for individuals who are brands, whether it's a coach or a consultant or a financial advisor or a real estate advisor. A lot of them are just looking around at what everybody else is doing and getting these cues from everyone within their industry, as opposed to looking at, what is it that makes me different? What about my background, where I'm from, my education, my specific skill set, who I know? What's my cool twist, synergy that makes me different, that could make me stand out, right? It might have something that has nothing to do with what you're selling per se, or what you're talking about. It just might be, maybe it is a love of animals and you support animal rights groups and you tie that into your brand. Or you and I both love Gabby Bernstein, and Gabby does a great job with her brand, and she does something on Instagram like her Gabby's cooking show, right? That really has nothing to do with the books that she writes and her Spirit Junkie brand.
But it's part of what you love about her brand, is that she's sharing all the things that she's interested in.
People ask her all the time for more cooking tips and recipes, and and
we're
it
not
makes her human.
And how great to be able to
that's
express
exactly
all
right.
those sides of ourselves.
That's right. It makes us more human. It makes us transparent and vulnerable.
Right.
And that's a big key.
Right. One of the things I love about the book are all the quotes in the book. Where did you come up with the quotes?
Well, they are some of my favorite quotes, and I collect quotes, and so I'm just such a big believer in the wisdom of others. Obviously, the wisdom in ourselves, right? We talk about that a lot, going within, but I am often inspired by others' words, and so I chose some of my favorite ones for the book, hoping that they would inspire and motivate all the women that are reading and using the book.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I just love that you can go through and write in the book, and that you can use these, and you just really help us get specific. Because I know, I started a small jewelry line. Yeah. And really,
yes, I'm wearing one of your bracelets. Look.
But it is a lot to do. It's a lot to manage. It's a lot. And of course, I have asked you a million questions. I've asked my friends that do jewelry, a million questions.
Yes.
You know, there's so much to take on. You really cover that in the book, and in a really beautiful, creative way. So it doesn't feel so structured. It's like, okay, I've got to make a business plan here. It feels like, why am I doing this? Why do I love this? And how do I, to the best of my ability, share it with others in a way that they'll understand where I'm coming from,
right?
You know, specifically. And thank goodness we have so many outlets today through social media. But also, you know, if you think about the Estee Lauder model, so much of it's just sitting down and talking about your brand, having a business card. You know, are these things that you just, what makes women good at running brands? Like, what is it? Because I know we network a lot. We sit at lunch and we hand each other cards and we talk about what we like.
Right. Yeah, of course.
Try this face cream. Ooh, it's great. I love it. Oh, it smells good. You know, all those things that, you know.
Well, overall, I think we are natural collaborators as women.
Yeah.
And I think as women, we also want to help.
Yes.
Right? And culturally, we are raised much more so than men to be connected to our emotions, that our emotions are okay, it's okay to feel. And the most powerful brands understand that in order not only to get a client, right, to have a client, but to keep and nurture a client, that it's the emotional connection that's so powerful.
Definitely.
And so that's why I think women do have an advantage when they are creating a brand.
And when we're doing this, creating a brand and working hard and raising kids, and some of us had husbands that, you know, we have to take care of and love and nurture too. How do you do it? Like, how, I know you and I sit, and a lot of our conversations are about wellness and health, and
yes,
how do we feel good?
Yeah.
Just feel good through the day.
Because if you don't have your health, then nothing else matters.
Right.
That's the reality. And I learned that firsthand 17, 18 years ago when I was living in New York, and I have vertigo, and I fell in my apartment. I was in the shower, which could have been much more of a debacle than it was, but I didn't hit my head, thank goodness, but I literally could not get up off the floor. And it really frightened me, and it made me realize that if I couldn't function and if I wasn't healthy, then nothing else mattered, right? My work didn't matter if I had a closet full of clothes, like, you know, my priorities really shifted then. And I continue, I think, you know, it's interesting, we sometimes get wake-up calls in terms of our health. And so that has since then been an extreme priority for me. And so we have to make time, right? And we have to take care of ourselves. It's, you know, it's a little bit cliche and it's been used so much, but it's the saying of, you know, when you're on the airplane and putting the oxygen mask on yourself first. It's just true. You can't take care of other people or your work, your book baby, right, if you don't have your health. And so I make it a priority. You know, I have a great acupuncturist. You know, I see my doctor when I need to. I take my green powders and my supplements, and I exercise regularly because it's such a de-stressor for me. So I make it a priority. I schedule it in. It is on my calendar. It's not just, oh, I'll get around to it. No, it's a priority.
Yeah, I've been reading a lot about it and hearing a lot about it, where and experiencing it in my own life, where this idea of being so busy versus taking the time to sort of get quiet and go within and visualize it and allow you to visualize it and to allow yourself to create and attract things. So it's not just about like, oh, I got to keep going all day and I've got to do 100 meetings, and because people also feel your energy. I mean, when you walk in the room and you're exhausted and you're depleted, no matter how wonderful your brand is, no matter, you know, what you're trying to say to someone, they feel your energy, think, oh, this woman is exhausted.
That's right. That's
this
right.
woman's working too hard.
That's right.
And there's something about being centered and even just visualizing and focusing on what we want. And this, obviously, the book is such a great way to
get clear,
and help us visualize that. But to take the time to be quiet each day and have those rituals is important.
Well, we were talking earlier in the conversation about feminine energy and masculine energy, right? And I do believe that, feminine energy is more about allowing and being open and receiving and surrender.
Yes.
And there is a part of that. I do see so much comparison going on and have clients that have come to me and have said, well, I want my website to look exactly like that person's website and so on and so forth. And, I always say, well, take a step back and connect to what you really want. That person might look successful to you, that person might be successful, but what's going to work for one person isn't necessarily going to work for you. And so to take the time to take a step back, and so whether it is meditation or 2 minutes of quiet time, before you get your kids up in the morning, whatever that looks like, to be able to connect to our truth and to our voice. Yes. I agree with you. I believe that it can't be all about busyness. It just can't.
I think we can create a lot in stillness.
Yes.
And that's kind of a new way of looking at things.
Yeah.
You and I both like to make vision boards.
Yes.
Which reminds me.
Which I haven't done one in a long time.
I know. I started to the other day, and it's all messy. I've got my, the cutouts everywhere and gluing it. And then, of course, I think, I've got to go run and do this. But it's such a pleasurable experience. And it really works. You and I talk about this all the time, how all the things that we put on our board end up sort of coming into our lives, and it's powerful, this other way of creating, this other way of manifesting.
Well, it speaks to intention, right? And I do think that things that are done with intention are much more powerful and have the opportunity to be much more compelling. And so it's the same way with creating a brand. The more intentional you are, the more you take a step back and look at what you really want to create in the world, the more powerful it will ultimately be.
And graceful.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
With grace.
Yes, exactly.
So why is this book so important for women now?
So obviously we need women to step up now. We really need women to step up and say, I can do this. I want a seat at the table, and if no one's going to offer it to me, I'm going to take it, right? And so this book, I believe, because it is both a guide and a workbook, will take women through a process that will help them feel a lot more confident about their work, about their message, about what they're doing in the world, and ultimately make a difference. And that's why it's so important to me, and I think important to the women who ultimately use the book.
What's cool about the book is you don't even have to have an actual brand. It's just you. It's it's being more specific in your own life, which is what's so
100%,
great.
Which, as we talked about earlier, you are a brand.
Exactly.
Right?
It comes back to that too.
So again, it's a more intentional process, and I think it makes you a lot more aware of how you're perceived and how you actually have some control over that.
Right, absolutely. So what is a brand?
So a lot of people think that a brand is just a logo or their business card or a tagline, but a brand is really your promise of value, right? It's the words and the thoughts and the images that come to mind when somebody engages with you in some way, when they think about you, when they see you speak, when they read your book.
So why does an individual need a brand?
Well, an individual is a brand,
okay,
whether they know it or not, right?
Right.
So an individual, a person, you or me, we need to be more intentional about how we're being perceived. Otherwise, people are going to think about you. They're going to say things about you. That's just life. And whether you have control over it or not is completely up to you.
Right. So what makes one brand more compelling than another brand?
The emotional connection, plain and simple. The emotional connection is what makes one brand more compelling than another brand. It's what attracts people to you. It's what makes people sit up and take notice in the first place and then ultimately stay.
Okay, so why is this book important for women now?
This book is important because right now, in this day and age, the time that we live in, we need more women to step up and say, I can do this. More women than ever are starting businesses, and which is great, and they have resources to more tools, this just being one of them. Obviously I'm biased, but I do feel like, in fact, an acquaintance recently said to me, she said, it's amazing, you created something that seems so simple, right? You take someone step by step through a process, and yet so powerful.
Oh, it is, because when you sit down and try to do that yourself, it's very challenging.
Right, so this is a guideline.
Thank goodness, yeah, really. So why do women have an advantage when it comes to building a brand?
Women have an advantage when building a brand because we are raised, I think, on a more emotional level. We are raised in a way where emotions are okay. And we tend to connect a little bit more easily with others sometimes, and we're natural collaborators, natural givers. There's a natural generosity. It's not that men don't necessarily have these qualities, but women historically have been raised in that way. And so when creating a compelling brand, we want to connect, right? We want to build an emotional connection.
It's interesting because when there was some article about how women invest as well.
Yes.
And when they invest, they tend to do it in things that they know, like the grocery store that they know, or the brands that they use.
That's exactly
and they've
right.
learned to rely on, versus just, okay, it sounds good on paper.
Or they got a hot tip.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Because for that woman, she probably has felt some sort of connection to that brand that she is going to invest in.
Right. So good. So what's the most important first step in creating a successful brand?
The most important first step is clarity. And that's what this book is all about, really. Figuring out, why am I doing the work that I'm doing? Why is it important? Who am I trying to reach? What's the value that I'm delivering to my audience? All of these questions are incredibly important. So getting clear about who you are, your narrative, and your tribe, who your people are, is really the first step.
Okay. And what's a brand handbook, and why do you need one? We all need one, but why? Yeah, exactly.
Well, you'd be really surprised how many people don't know what a brand handbook is and have never heard of it. And again, I go back to like 95% of the women who come to me for their business have never put together a brand handbook. And if you look at much larger brands, right, like maybe the Ralph Lauren of the world, you know, this is something that they've taken the time to put together. So a brand handbook is the GPS. It is the anchor for your brand, and it contains all of the information we've been talking about, right? Your bigger why, your mission statement, who you are, your ideal audience. It also contains a style guide, what your brand should look like, whether it's in a magazine or online on a website. And so it becomes the guiding force for everything that you do, and ultimately, and it's a living, breathing document that you can go back to time and again and refer to when you're making decisions about, should I speak at that conference? Should I partner with this company? And it really does direct you in terms of, how do I want to be perceived? And you can revisit it often.
That's so wonderful. So how do you differentiate yourself from others in your industry?
That's such a good question, right?
I have a lot of help.
So people forget, right, that differentiation is key when it comes to creating a compelling brand, because there's so much blending in going on, right? There's so much noise in the marketplace right now. You weren't meant to blend in, you were meant to stand out.
So
and it's so important to remember that you have a unique background. You have unique experiences, education, people that you know, where you came from. Everything that you've experienced and done in your entire life has brought you to this place and time. And you want to look at all of those things and say, how can a twist on this or a turn on that make me stand out and make me a little bit different? For example, I come from the fashion industry, right? And PR. And so, you know, in working with women, my fashion background brings that certain element of style into my creative direction and the work that I do. Another person who is working in brand development and creative direction may come from a completely different industry.
Right. Tell me a little bit about your background. So how you started and sort of your journey here.
My journey, yeah. So I have worked in PR and marketing, I'm going to date myself, but like almost 30 years now, because I started with internships. In college, I worked for Warner Brothers Pictures. I actually, interestingly enough, worked for a entertainment PR firm in Boston that was started by 2 women. And then I worked for an ad agency in New Orleans. I'm originally from New Orleans, as you know. So I worked with an advertising agency. I worked with a magazine and a business paper in New Orleans. And then when I went to New York, I worked at Harper's Bazaar. And that's how I got involved with the fashion industry. And I ultimately left Bazaar to start my own agency. I started freelancing and took on a handful of fashion clients doing public relations and brand development. And that was when I was in New York 16, 17 years ago. And then I moved to LA and grew my agency. And so lots of experience in the marketing and PR and branding worlds, both from an entertainment perspective as well as a fashion perspective. And I ran my agency for a decade, but philanthropically, as you know, I was working with Step Up Women's Network, and prior to that for Women in Need in New York. And I loved working with younger women and with at-risk teen girls. And towards the end of having my PR agency, I was feeling pretty unfulfilled. And I was trying to figure out my next step. And I just, you can't force your way through something, as you know. You can't push it to make it happen. And I wasn't really getting any answers. And so for about a year, I was really struggling to figure it out. And I'll never forget, I was driving home from a meeting with a mentee. This was back at the end of 2008. And the word shebrand popped into my head. And I had to pull over to the side of the road because it was so powerful. And it just seemed like such a simple thought, right? But it was definitely a universal download that came to me, which was, why can't I use my 25 years of marketing and branding and PR experience to specifically help women? And so literally within a month, I had downsized my agency. I let go of a few clients. I kept a few of them because financially it made sense while I built another company. And so that was the end of 2008. So the beginning of 2009, shebrand was born, and
what does
here we are.
shebrand do exactly?
So we do brand development, creative direction, some influencer outreach. We mainly work with both women and companies that market to women on their brand development, on their messaging. With larger brands, we help them to connect with women more powerfully through their content, through their creative. Women make 85% of purchasing decisions.
So when you were growing up, what inspired you to want to do so much for women? I see you as sort of being born wearing a Gloria Steinem t-shirt. Like you came out and your mother was like, okay, I think she's a feminist. Like, she's born feminist.
I'd like to be able to say that, but no, I don't. I actually don't think I was born a feminist necessarily. I think I think my experiences, and I've grown into that.
Yes.
I think I've always wanted to help women specifically, which is why I volunteered with organizations that helped women or help women and at-risk teens, because it took me a long time to connect to my voice.
Interesting.
And so if I can make that easier for another woman or a teenage girl, that's very fulfilling for me. And so that philanthropically was my work, and now has also become the work that I do, right? Because branding and creating a compelling brand, whether you are an individual woman or a company that has a product that markets to women, it is about having a compelling voice, and it is about making a connection. And I think it is about caring and generosity. I think some of the most compelling brands have a bigger mission, and they are trying to do important work in the world. And I think in terms of feminism, for me, I have always been pretty active. When I was 22, so right out of college, I wrote a letter to the editor for the Times-Picayune, which at the time was the New Orleans paper, it still is, because they were in the legislature were trying to pass legislation to take away abortion rights from women. And so back even at 22, I got angry, you know, and I wrote a letter to the editor and it got published in the paper, and that felt good, and, you know, change was happening. And then obviously, as you know, with the 2016 election, I think that was a big wake-up call for a lot of women, as women's rights today are threatened. You know, many of us have sat up and said, not on my watch. I wrote a piece for the Shebrand blog about 6 months ago called Why Anger is Good for Your Brand. And I believe that anger and passion can be a cue and a clue to what's really important to us. And so for me, in terms of being a feminist, and this is the interesting thing, I think, you know, feminism has so many misconceptions, right? And so many people think of it as a bad word, or that, you know, it's like women who hate men. And I feel like nothing could be farther from the truth. You know, the definition of feminism is believing that men and women deserve equal rights, right? Social, political, economical rights. Equal. That's all it is.
Susan Sarandon, we were out marching in the snow to end violence against women. It was Women for Peace in New York at the UN. And she got up and spoke, and at the end she said something, I'm paraphrasing, but she basically said, you know, when women are free and able to express themselves, men have a lot more fun.
Of course.
And I thought that's so true.
I'll take that a step further. I'll piggyback on that, because yes, that's true, and society as a whole benefits, right? Because women, I mean, you know, going back to our conversation about, you know, feminine energy, because we are in many ways the nurturers and the caretakers, and so when women are happy and thriving, everyone thrives and everyone benefits.
And Simone de Beauvoir said the contrary, which is all forms of oppression lead to war. So whether it's in a personal relationship or globally, any form of oppression is going to lead to some revolution in some way.
That's right.
So the more that we can all allow each other to be
who we are,
whoever it is,
of
man,
course.
woman, child, you know,
That's
no matter what your beliefs are, how you were raised, that, you know, I think that's where we're going. It seems like such a mess, but I think that's sort of what, so is childbirth, and look what happens, you know, you have a beautiful child that comes into the world. So I'm kind of seeing our times like that, which is we're in the midst of a birth, and we're seeing a lot of things that are seemingly old ideas.
Yes.
And we're seeing them sort of crumble, and we're seeing these new ideas. And of course we fumble sometimes with the words or the phrasing or how we're getting it across, and we of course don't want to threaten anyone. But I think once, if you realize at the end of it, there's nothing to be afraid of, if we all can sort of stop judging each other
and work together,
then that's the most powerful movement there is. You know.
Amen.
For sure.
Yes. Thank you.
I love you.
I love you. Thank you.
Whoa. So excited to do this book.
You have your very own copy.
Oh my God.